Now, I can't remember if I've talked about this book before. I probably have. It's just been too influential on my growth to not have talked about it. But because I'm going to be getting back into building that F-18, FA-18, the Super Hornet here pretty soon, I wanted to just kind of go. I wanted to pull this out for me just to look at. It's a great source of inspiration, and every time I look through it, I always see some little thing that I go, oh yeah, that would be a good idea. I could use that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this book. Now, as you can probably see, Aircraft Scale Modeling FAQ. Daniel Zamarbide is the author and the modeler. It's from AK Interactive. You can barely see that, but anyway, if you do order it, make sure you order the English version. There's an English version and a Spanish version. And unless you're a Spanish speaker, then of course order the Spanish version. But this book, it had come out. I don't even remember. Let me see. Is there a printed date? Let's see. 2015. This book had come out, and I had heard so many good things about it. But at the time, it was, I want to say, $80 or $90. And I just thought that's too much to spend on a book. Now, if it would have been a very nice 132nd Spitfire kit, I'd have spent $90 on it. And then my model shop got in a copy of it, and I looked through it, and I said, order me one. Because I saw this as an investment in my learning and in my growth. Now, I'm not trying to sell books for AK, I promise. But it's hard to describe how much this book positively impacted my modeling. And more than just aircraft. I mean, at the time, it was the tail end of the time that I was building exclusively aircraft. But a friend who, one of those friends that you meet on the internet that you may keep up with every, year and a half, 6 months, whatever. I mean, we're friends, but, we're not just constantly writing back and forth. But he used to occasionally keep up with my blog, and he emailed me and said, what have you done? What are you doing? And he said, I see a definite difference in your models. And I kind of laughed, and I wrote him back and said, well, I started looking at this book. And it's not that, I don't think I was a bad modeler before that, but I was kind of doing it, I don't want to say blind, but I was doing it based on what I saw other people on the forums that I participated in doing. And I had never, other than looking at Brett Green's stuff from Australia, which was very good, I had never really looked at, I guess what you'd call a professional level modeler's work, not in a way like this book showed. And then after I looked at this book, it was like all of the techniques that I already knew, all of the methods, all of the products, all of those things, I had all the tools sitting here. This book kind of brought those to life, showed me a way. This is where I really started. I had already been talking about it. I can find evidence of it in my blog, even before I had this book, but I had already been thinking in terms of depth of finish. And I know I'm not the first to think of that, but for me, it was, I guess you'd say, a new concept. And like I said, I knew I wasn't the first to ever say it, but I don't recall anyone in particular making me think, okay, I need to add depth of finish. It just kind of emerged as the label I started using for what I was trying to achieve. Well, when this book, it kind of all of a sudden clarified it. So now they have an FAQ for armor. Of course, they have an FAQ for sci-fi. Lincoln Wright wrote that. I have that also. So if you're an armor modeler, certainly their FAQ for that. I think Adam Wilder may have written that. I know Adam Wilder has done several books on armor modeling, and they are magnificent. In fact, I don't know if it's still out there. Even if you're not an armor modeler, if you're any modeler, look up Adam Wilder on YouTube. Just do a search for Adam Wilder KV1 series. Watch that series. It's just stupendous, and it's amazing in its scope. It's like a 26-part series. Each part is like 10 or 15 minutes. They're short parts, and they're kind of entertaining to watch. He's actually a very humorous guy, dry humor, but still very funny. But anyway, this book, if you're really wanting to step out and really work on growing in the hobby, I highly recommend this book. It's probably more than $90 now. It's probably a pretty good chunk. But again, it's hard for me to even quantify the enjoyment in the hobby that I've gotten having had this book and gone through it and tried to do the things that are in it. Now, just to look at the book a little bit, they break it up into these various sections. So, it's got a section on assembly and preparation of materials, and it goes over everything from cutting and sanding to rescribing panel lines to wires to working with vac form canopies. They're evil, don't use them. Control cables and struts. I mean, just a whole bunch of things. And they have some basic painting guide. They have some basic techniques areas where they talk about priming, paneling, pre-shading, paneling with tape, camouflage with an airbrush, washes, demarcating panels, chipping and scratches, smoke stains, dirt, all sorts of stuff. And they give good demonstrations. And then they go very in detail into interior and exterior details, covering things like seats, cockpits, pilots, structures, props and spinners, weapons and fuel tanks, walkways, engines, and then external camouflaging. They go over a World War I, several examples of World War I, World War II, and the jet age. And then they have an area on burnt areas, black paint, checkerboard, invasion stripes. I mean, and more stuff over here that is too far away for my eyes to actually read. But metal weathering, I can see one now. How to do a shark mouth, creating a scene. So it breaks it down in a very logical way. And there are other books that I've looked at for aircraft modeling. I had a ton of them. In fact, I gave myself a heart attack this morning. I went to pull this book off the shelf because it's been a little while since I've looked at it, and I couldn't find it. And recently I had given away a huge chunk of my library to our model club. And I thought, don't tell me I gave that book away. But then I found it on another shelf, and heart attack was averted. Now, when they break this up into sections, they'll have a section that covers, World War I, and do they have the World War I wheels? They may not do the wheels for World War I. They had these World War II wheels. These look like they're for, say, a P-40, maybe a P-39. These look like they're for a Messerschmitt. Everybody always talks about it. Is it a Messerschmitt 109, BF 109, or is it a Messerschmitt 109 or a BF 109? And I've heard people argue about that for years. And I had the benefit of having a dear friend, a man older than me. In fact, he was my pastor when I was growing up, who had been a chaplain's assistant for the 357th Fighter Group towards the end of World War II. And I asked him, I said, Doug, did you call it a Messerschmitt 109 or a BF 109? He said, I'd never heard the term BF. He said, we always called it a Messerschmitt 109. And he said, more likely, we just called it a 109. So anyway, just a little bit of history tidbit there. But they go through, now I will say step by step, once you get into it, you'll see that, okay, there's some intermediate steps that may not always be shown, because I think having documented my work, to show in a book of this size, to show every single step would have necessitated a book about this thick, about 4 times as thick as it is. So what I can say is a lot of people that looked at this book, they said it doesn't tell you all the steps. And I'm like, well, in some ways it does, because you have to read the narrative for some of it, and other parts of it you have to go, okay, what went on there? For example, on these tires here, it kind of goes from, you've got it painted, this isn't true black, it's probably like an XF69 or something like that, a dark gray, and then he paints on this lighter gray. I find it interesting that even though he's doing it for AK, he's using Vallejo paints there. This may have been before AK was releasing a lot of paints. I don't remember. But then he shows, he says to reduce the contrast, he applies several layers of matte black paint, heavily diluted with alcohol, 96 proof alcohol, and a ratio of 90% alcohol, 10% paint. Add as many coats as necessary in order to attain the tone I want. He's talking about airbrushing, and then he goes in with this weathering pigments, and he's got some wash going on there. And then he talks about the pigments are barely noticeable, but once they dry, then he checks them to see that they can be seen. And then he talks about here, this is where the narrative comes in. He talks about airbrushing on a light sand color around the edge to get that fading and that blending and stuff like that. And then he shows the final tire. Now, with any book like this, you have to look and you have to go, okay, I see other things going on here. Like I see there's speckling going on here. Obviously, he had the wheel rims masked off there, and then they show those. And there's another section that talks about that. But of note here, and this is one of the things that I'd kind of known, but as I really examined this book, I started looking at, okay, what are the little details? What I would literally take a model that I had and look at its tires and go, what distinguishes my tire from his? Because I did much of these same techniques, but I started looking, like I tended to dry brush the treads because it was faster. He painted them in, which gave them a much sharper and distinct look. Notice how right here, they're very, very prominent, but when you get to the final product, it all blends together. That was something else that was kind of a further learning point from me. I knew it, but this just kind of showed it in a way that I had not thought about it. Notice the little tiny chipping on the rim here, and notice that the rim is not actually silver. That was another thing I did. I always painted my rims silver. Now I tried to weather them and dirty them up and all that, but I'm looking at this going, why does this look so good? And then I realized it's not silver. It's actually looks like it's using some non-metallic metal type thinking of various shades of gray. And there's some tiny little, imperfections and nicks and things like that on there that really, really make this stand out. And so that was one of the things that really helped me, is looking at those little details and saying, what's the difference in what I'm doing and what he's doing, and what can I add to my own work that would help change what I do. Now, about that time, I had started getting into jets, and this section here definitely helped me, like with the tires. Notice here the way he did it was he painted them, and it looks like he painted them pure black there. Then he used tiny, tiny strips of masking tape to mask off the tread, and then he airbrushed it. And then he went in and he did some chipping, and notice the staining around here. It's not super prominent, but I'm going to guess that was done with enamels I'm trying to read as I'm looking at this, because it doesn't actually talk a whole lot about that. It looks like, let's see, graphite area brush towards the shadows. You can see the difference between the unshaded wheel on the left. Oh, it says he added graphite. Okay, he added graphite and then brushed it away. So it shows that this was another thing I learned. I knew about using graphite. I knew about using enamels and all of these things. But it showed me that, okay, if you want an effect like this, you don't necessarily have to use the enamels every time or the oils every time. Experiment, combine. Again, it was part of taking a lot of separate parts that went on. I had all these tools, like you can't see it, it's off camera, but around my desk, I've got paintbrushes and bottles of paint and glue and all of these things. This helped kind of bring it together and go, just put it all together. I'm still learning, of course, but this was a leap for me. And before, and keep in mind, before that, I had built hundreds of models. I had sold models. I'd done commission builds. I'd, been having a blog for a long time. And, I'd carry my stuff to model shows. I never participated, but I would do their display only tables. And, my friends would look at it and they would, wow, John, you do great work. And I was appreciative of that, but I was never impressed with my work. I'm still not. But I'm looking at it going, there's something missing. When I got this book, I don't want to say it was overnight. I had to start trying this stuff, but this really, really was important in my growth. And then, like, to go on here to the landing gear. This is for a modern jet here. And like one of the things that I noticed, and like for here, this is where you just have to extrapolate. Up here, he's talking about, I'm guessing this is some kind of World War II strut or something. Looks like a tail wheel, and I'm not sure what that's from. It may be a Russian aircraft. I don't know. This is a strut. I'm thinking it's from an A4, but I may be wrong. This is a jet strut, and it's just a finished picture. Here's the unfinished with some wiring and tubing, and here's the finished. And one, it showed me how much wiring makes a difference. I still don't like doing it, but how much it makes a difference. And then again, just looking at the little details, the little chipping, and if you think about that, this thing is probably only about that tall. The very fine chipping, what decals bring to the table, just what a little bit of shading in some of these areas brings in. And there's ways you can take it further. So this is part of the reason I'm looking through this, is to get the inspiration as I start going to building the F-18. And about that time, I'd actually built, not long after I got this book, I'd actually built this very same kit that I'm going to be building. And this part here on the landing gear doors was really a big deal for me, because I had not built jets in the past. And I knew that the doors, the wheel wells, the doors, the gear were white. But this really gave me kind of a good sample that I could see up close, because the photography in this is really good. That I could see up close and I could go, okay, how do you get from here to here? And it gave me some steps, and the stuff that maybe wasn't shown, the intermediate kind of steps and all that, I could extrapolate from those, because that's where experience comes in. I had a couple of guys that I knew that were beginners that looked at this book, and it just totally blew them away. And they're like, I don't know how to do any of this. They would stare at it and they go, okay, I see this. I still don't get this. Because there has to be some experience. There has to be some understanding that, okay, if he's saying use enamel washes, how do you apply enamel washes? How do you make enamel washes work? If you've never done that, that seems like a huge step, or I believe it does, because I know when I was getting back into modeling and saw how people would use enamel washes, that I thought, I'll never be able to do that. That looks like the most complicated thing in the world. And then I just started doing it, and I figured out if you just do it, once you've screwed it up once or twice, and by screw up, I don't mean ruin the model. I mean screw it up by, oh, I applied it too heavy or too light. I need to use less thin or more thin or whatever. Within a couple of minutes, you're getting stuff that looks like this. So experience really has that. You have to look at anything like this, whether it's this book or another one. You have to look at this book as through the filter of experience. Now, if you don't have a lot of experience and you really earnestly go through these books and you try to do things and you try to emulate them, you're going to gain experience. Experience, growth through experience comes through both successes and failures. And usually, at least for me, it's more failures than successes. But, it's like the old story of Thomas Edison. He tried two different things for the filaments, supposedly. I don't know if this is true, but I've always heard it. Tried 2,000 different things for the filaments of the light bulb. And they said, you had 2,000 failures. He said, no, I figured out 2,000 things that didn't work. So it's just a little difference of attitude. Another area on the Super Hornet that I'm going to be building is going to be, of course, the wheel wells. And I hear they're showing blue. I don't quite know what aircraft this is from, but it's from a jet. And then there's some white. This is metallic, but this is the kind of place where you look and you see the types of things that he's doing, and this was a huge thing for me. Like if you can see down here, hang on, let me adjust the camera a little bit. All right, if you look down here, notice that he used a little darker blue here, and then some lighter colors here, and it showed. It was a forced perspective. It was a forced depth. And that was an important thing for me to see, because typically prior to this, I would have painted it all one color and relied on washes to bring out the shapes. Now, washes do a great job of outlining detail, but they don't do a great job of indicating something that's higher, something that's lower. And when I saw this way he did this here, it really was a aha kind of moment. Now that I've been working on painting minis, I know that's used currently and has been for quite a few years in the mini world, but I hadn't seen this in the aircraft world. In the aircraft world, the influence of this type of modeling was called Spanish style. I don't know if that term is even still used, but people would I started hearing people say, "Oh, he did that in Spanish style." And I'm like, "What is Spanish style?" And it's this more exaggerated look that Daniel Zamarbide and others begin to, I think Mig Jimenez in the armor world began doing it. It involved a lot of the modulation techniques that both AK and MiG were doing at the time. And honestly, the Spanish style received a ton of criticism. When I started doing models in that Spanish style, attempting to, guys that I knew would be like, "Oh, that's Spanish style." And I never tried to really argue to defend it, because it is a style. It's a stylistic way of presenting things. I just find it very interesting and fun. That was the key for me. But a couple of guys that I really knew that would kind of ask me, "Okay, why are you doing this?" Because to their eye, and I understood it, because to my eye, the first time I saw it, I thought, that looks kind of weird. I said, here's a benefit you may not have thought of. Even if you don't necessarily like this style, I said, if you learn to execute something like this, you're going to be a better painter, because you're going to have better control, because this requires control, this requires thinking, this requires thinking about the volumes that you're working with and how would light fall on them, and how do you work harder to fool the brain into seeing dimension that's not there, because the depth, say, of these little things here is very minute, but by adding in some additional lighting, your brain interprets those as being much higher off of the surface. In fact, one time to demonstrate this, I painted a wheel, a gear door cover, and I sanded off all the details. And I painted, very carefully painted, masked off stuff, painted all of the shapes on the inside of the wheel well. I painted on little rivets, painted shadow around them, and weathered them and all of that. And I went and showed it to some folks. And I would show it to them about 3 feet away. I'd say, "What do you think of that?" And they're like, "Wow, that's amazing." And I'd be like, "All right," and I feel the surface. And it was smooth. And it blew their mind. And I said, "This is why you do this. Because you can fool the brain into seeing something that's just not there." And it was, for me, it was transformative with cockpits. All of a sudden, cockpits that didn't have a lot of details suddenly began having a lot of details. And people would go, "Oh, did you get a resin cockpit?" "Nope, just paint it on." "So it's flat?" "Yep, it's flat. That button is just a flat area painted with a shadow under it." Your brain is drawing in the depth. And I mean, there's a certain limit of what you can get away with, but you suddenly start seeing it like a superpower, because this type of thinking grows your painting skills and expands your thinking of what is possible. Now, to look at just a few more things that I found very interesting. It's funny, I notice when I get to this part of the book that the spine has started kind of coming apart there. When I was started building jets, I think the first one that I built was an A11 Ghibli, I don't know. It's a beautiful little Italian jet, light strike fighter. And I got a little heavy-handed with the shading, but you learn. But when I started doing the pylons for the ordnance, I looked at this a whole lot. You can't really see it, but what looks like decals are actually just areas painted with a fine brush, just skipped along to make it look like stuff. Up close, it's easy to tell that it's just painted stuff on. But having done this, if you get the little white lettering fine enough, then even from just 2 feet away, you can't tell that it's not a decal. It's amazing. But just seeing, okay, how do they do these things? Because, again, building World War II aircraft, I never really built stuff like this. And so this was really helpful in my own work doing pylons. If you like doing engines, it goes into some pretty good detail on how to make engines look good. So this was another thing. I've never liked doing engines. The way I did engines was I painted them a steel silver, and then I ran some washes over them and painted a couple of details with different colors and just let them be. This really improved my engine modeling, seeing just the little extra details that weren't that hard to do to make them stand out. Now, I kind of skipped ahead in the book, but the section on painting cockpits was one of my favorites. This section right here, I think this was an F4 Phantom cockpit. This section here, it really, the World War II stuff I liked. There was a section on doing Spitfires and the interiors. There was a section on doing, there was a P-40 somewhere in here that was just masterful. The ejection seats, masterful. I learned so much from that. But when it got to the cockpit, and not only for a jet, but just in general, the thinking that was done here, this very detailed look at a U.S. cockpit, and the step by step, and seeing the progress, and seeing the little things that he did. It was like everything I did had been the base painting. It's like I would do the base painting and then the fine detailing, but none of the stuff in between. And this book showed me, okay, that in between stuff is how you get, something that looks like this. And even if you're looking at this and going, well, I think that's overdone, it doesn't look realistic, that's not the point. The point is, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, there's probably, maybe not. Maybe you're comfortable with all of this, but generally, what I find is that most people start seeing that, okay, the 3 steps that they had been doing are enhanced by adding 2 more or 3 more, or in some cases 7 or 8 more. But it's fun because, painting cockpits to me is the most fun part of an aircraft build. I love painting the cockpits for some reason. But this section just really made me examine my work. And I would sit here and look at a photo for 10 minutes and just drinking in the one photo and going, okay, what am I seeing? Note every detail, note every inch of it. I would sit here sometimes with a pencil or a pen or a paintbrush or something and say, okay, what do I see here? What do I see here? What do I see here? And I would really examine it to see. There were times that I even would look at it and go, okay, are those shadows, are those actual shadows by the lighting taking the photograph, or is that forced shadow? I never did figure that out. But it may have been forced shadow, but it's great help in doing this. Now there's other things in here that are just amazing. Working on wood grain, how to do wood grain, how to simulate that. That's really cool. Of course, I found this section to be really, really helpful because I was building so many Spitfires. And when I looked at this, it really kicked up my Spitfire modeling a notch. All of my World War II aircraft modeling, but especially the Spitfire, to go through and see this, because I was very familiar with all these steps. But then to see the extra things he did in it to just make it look better, it really just was transformative. This was another one that just was amazing to me. And again, I learned so much from it. I had built aircraft that looked somewhat close to this, but when I started again looking at the little details, and again, this is an example of where you have to use some experience to help you understand. Like this photo, if you look at this here, and then you see where it is here, you see that there's some other steps that had to take place, but you can start kind of guessing at what they were, which was, there's matte coating in there, there's airbrush dust effects, there's all sorts of things, because you notice the amount of contrast between right here, the gray, the light gray and the dark gray here, is much less pronounced here. Well, a matte coat will help bring that out. An overall dust coat will help bring that out. The overall fading, sometimes just putting a mist coat of something like, to me, a deck tan or a very light gray over something. It just shifts all the colors a little lighter. It blends things together. So this, again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record. This really added in the extra kick that I had been looking for. And the whole reason, actually, that I decided to do this video was I was looking at this particular scheme. Even though this is the older Navy scheme, and is the Super Hornet's going to have a different scheme, it's still gray on top. And gray on modern jets can be really hard to work with because you don't want to get it too dirty. A lot of the techniques that work for World War II models don't work for this. But when you're talking about naval aircraft, when they're out at sea, I've found some photos. They get extremely beat up looking, but it's not in that World War II way of, crew walks around on a dirt air strip, climbs up on it, gets dirt all over it, it's flying around in dust. If this makes sense, Navy carrier fighters are a clean dirty, if that makes sense. So I just went back to look at this, and again, just looking at these techniques that he used to get this result was a great refresher, and just reminded me how transformative this book is. It's kind of, I don't know that sad is the word, but because I'm comfortable now with how to do these things, I can look at this and go, I know the path to get there. I may not be able to do it as good as Daniel, but I know the path to get there. It's kind of taken some of the shine away because when you look at it and there's still mystery to it, it's a lot of fun. But, I was able to look at this and just see, oh yeah, okay, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do this. Check your reference photos. And I use reference photos not so much for accuracy, but for just ideas of what to do. And sometimes it is for accuracy, but sometimes the accuracy comes through seeing a little detail you'd never seen before. Like there's a portion on the back of an F-18 that pops up, or a panel that pops up or something. And I noticed some weathering on one of the photos I found that's actually down to the bare metal. I'd never seen that. And whether that was caused by something that happened on that one flight or what, I was looking at it going, well, I've never seen that before. I'm going to add that detail. And somebody goes, oh, that wouldn't be realistic. I'm like, well, here's the photo, and it's a real photo. So take that and stuff it in your pipe and smoke it, Mr. Low Number Thumper IPMS guy. The thing that I really liked was at the end there was a gallery, and it was just a few photos, but you could see the full effect, because when you take all of these steps and apply them to all of these parts, so that it's consistent throughout, the result is just magnificent. Like I looked at this A4 and I'm like, that's how I want my jets to look. In fact, now that I look at it, that Ghibli that I did, maybe it wasn't too heavy in the post shading insofar as trying to look like Daniel Zamarbide. Maybe I did get a little heavy with it, but his looks heavier than I remembered since the last time I looked at this book. But like this finish on this Avenger is just beautiful. And again, this is one of those things that somebody would look at, and they would look at a photo from 1945 or 1944. I guess with this color scheme, it would have been 43, 44. And they may say, well, gee, that doesn't look realistic. Well, but it sells the brain on what you're trying to convey. And I think that's the important part. And for me, honestly, part of it was this sold better. Just pure and simple, this sold better. Because when I would do commission builds, when I would sell my models, this was the kind of work that got me more money. Just simple as that. And so while other modelers may stand there and look at it and go, that's overdone, most of my customers, it turns out, were older guys who had been modelers but could no longer model, but wanted new models on their shelf. And they liked my work. And so I had a lot of repeat customers. Interestingly, or maybe not so much, but it's interesting to me, when I would show my models to someone who had zero background in scale models, when I first started when I'm doing that way, I'm showing them to my wife, or would have friends over from church and somebody wasn't familiar with these things, and I'd show them to them and they would go, why does it look so dirty? Because they're looking at it like a toy, and they're expecting, when you have a toy airplane, even these, nicely done, pre-built, pre-painted toy airplanes, they tend to be very clean. And they were, now when I explained, well, notice that's an exhaust stain, and here's where the paint chips off, and here's where there's a fluid leak, and then they would go, oh, and it's like once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it, and they got it. But it was kind of funny that, people who were not into it would look at it and go, gosh, why'd you make it look so dirty? This olive drab finish really, really kind of, I could already do something that looked close to this, but this helped me add that extra little kick. That Emerald Lagasse bam kind of thing, that looking at this and looking at the P40 that he did, it's B26, this really helped my OD finishes go another step. And then, of course, I grew up the Phantoms. I grew up Vietnam era, and the Phantoms were just everywhere, and they were at Moody Air Force Base, and I loved Phantoms because we'd see them flying over the house, So this was something that I really enjoyed seeing. Last picture. I hated that this spine went down the middle, but this P40 is just absolutely gorgeous in my mind. This was why I modeled, was to try and get a look like this. Just the number of little fine details in this build are just stunning. So anyway, what I had meant to do in 20 minutes, I've now taken quite a lot longer, but that's this book. That's what's going to be kind of an inspiration behind the Super Hornet build. But just if you've not looked at a book like this, yeah, you can find a lot of this stuff online. You can find videos online, but there's something helpful about having a book that you can open up and look at while you're working. I mean, get right down at it and go, okay, where do these little dots come from? Well, I don't know how he put them on, but they look to be a medium gray. So I'm going to use this very fine paintbrush, or I'm going to use a sponge, or I'm going to use a pencil, and it may not be the exact way he did it, but it achieves the same effect, and that's what's important. And my final little rabbit trail, this is why I get so torqued when people say, oh, you shouldn't copy others. How the heck are you going to learn to do that? How are you going to learn to do that if you don't copy this? That's why I get really upset when people say, oh, you shouldn't copy. So that means if you're doing a historical model, every historical model should look completely different, because you can't even copy the original, right? You can take it to ridiculous points. No, the way to learn, it's like I've always said, the apprentice in Leonardo da Vinci's studio didn't learn by trying to do everything opposite of Leonardo da Vinci. Well, maybe he did. That was the guy that nobody's ever heard of. But he watched what Leonardo da Vinci was doing, and he tried to emulate that. And then at some point, when you develop the skills, then you start taking it in your own direction, your own style, your own preferences, your own products that you like to use. So this is a very good book. There's others like it, but these AK books are just masterful in their scope, especially this aircraft one and the armor one. Just great things. Quite an investment, but I think they're worth it. All right, I'll wrap it up. You know the deal. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. You know that. And I'll just say happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.